I can't think of a better way to kick off the regular season on this podcast than to have our special guest, Willie Anderson, former Bengals offensive lineman, multi-time Pro Bowler, in my book, Hall of Fame offensive tackle. Mr. Anderson, how are you, sir?
I'm good, guys. Thank you.
Well, thanks for making the time and being on the show. I know you're a busy guy, and even though you're not suiting up in the pads these days, you've got a lot of different things going on. Want to talk about that, but first, I kind of want to kick off with your thoughts on what the Cincinnati Bengals did this offseason. Obviously, they're coming off of two pretty poor seasons, losing seasons after making the playoffs 5 years in a row. They've made some changes. Some people think they're taking a step backward. Some people think they'll take a step forward. What do you see?
I think obviously the changes they made, getting a new left tackle there, and I think the previous season they struggled with the loss of Nightmare and Whitworth. I think bringing a guy come in and play left tackle and kind of showing that up. I'm sure that they're hoping it's going to be a big season for them. I think myself personally it's going to be a magical season, looking for something big to happen. I believe it's Marvin's last year coaching with the Bengals, and so I think Marvin wants to go out on a great note. And I think once they get going, get their speed up and things happen for them. I think knowing the offensive line is showing up with the tools they have at running back, quarterback, and receivers. I think it should be a big year in the defense. I think we all feel that the defensive line is going to probably carry this team, in my opinion.
Well, you have seen, you mentioned Marvin Lewis. You've seen a lot of, in your time in Cincinnati, you saw a lot of different coaches, a lot of different head coaches. But when Marvin Lewis came on board, there was a major sense of stability. And I've got kind of a couple questions on that front. I'll start with the fact that, were you surprised that Marvin Lewis re-signed with the Bengals this offseason, even after a couple of losing seasons and the team not really living up to expectations?
I did not. I know he and Mr. Brown feel about each other. Marvin has brought the Bengals, to respectability. Yes, he hasn't won a playoff game yet, but I know that irritates people. And I'm sure it irritates him, but I knew he would come on and sign. I think he signed for a one-year deal. I think he's supposed to put all the marbles in right now. And they're going to go real hard and try to get that playoff win, get in the playoffs, and get that win. So I personally did not think, it wasn't surprised to me that he signed back. Like I said, I feel it's a one-year deal, what I'm hearing, and I think it's going to be a big deal. I really do believe that.
Talking with former Bengals offensive tackle, Pro Bowl lineman Willie Anderson, really stoked to have him on the show to kick off week one of the regular season going forward here on the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Willie, your former teammate, TJ Hushmanzada, kind of got some publicity for, I guess, right and wrong reasons, and I don't want to put you in a bad situation here, so I'm not gonna really go too far into this, but TJ's a pretty outspoken guy, and he was, like yourself, he was a player who was in the pre-Marvin Lewis era of the Cincinnati Bengals and saw some pretty poor years from the franchise. And then, he was there with Marvin, and he experienced quite a bit of success under Marvin himself. And the team just was a much better team and in a much better place. Really what I want to ask you about is, I don't want you to give us horror stories about the franchise and your time there necessarily, but I'm sure, because you were there about 5 years, if I remember correctly, you were there about 5 years before he was. Yeah, and basically, the fact that he noticed a significant franchise change before, when Marvin Lewis got there and the way the team operated and all of that. I just wanted to get your take on that as well, because I think as fans, people from the outside looking in kind of sense that, but from a guy who experienced a massive amount of success under Marvin Lewis in his tenure there, I'd really like to get your take on, that maybe some of the organizational switches you saw once Lewis took over.
Yeah, so I'll make sure not to say anything that'll get me banned. I'm still hoping out that Mr. Brown
Mm-hmm.
I know the year that I say something crazy, it'd be the year he'll start it, and I'll be locked out of it.
Well, we don't want that.
But obviously people know. It was bad. I mean, it was bad. I mean, players who know it, who played there before, it was a bad time. I think. But looking back now, I think people were doing what they thought was best. But it was a crazy time for us. Man, we lost a lot of games. Man, we lost a lot of games, and the morale. The morale wasn't as bad as you would think it would be. Keto Spice and I, we talk every night. I think Keto every other day, and every other blue moon we're going to our Bengals depression thoughts of the '90s. We think that's the '90s, and like, oh my God, like what was going on back then? But when Marvin did come, I love to say, I don't know if Marvin even knows this, but I remember when we had just started Dick LeBeau, the press, the local press asked me. I was one of the only guys in the locker room that did after the game. They asked me, "Say, well, who do you like to get the Bengals to get?" I said, "Well, I think we should get that guy up in I think Marvin was in Washington at the time because I just thought we needed someone fresh from the outside that experienced winning. I mean, I had played against Marvin's defenses at Baltimore, so I knew his kind of coaching style and aggression. But so he comes up to speed. Like when Marvin first got there, everyone was so crazy about, oh man, he's changing everything. And I remember John Kitten and Marvin both saying, "Hey, we're not. Only thing we're doing now is to catch up with the rest of the league. It's like the rest of the league has these names that have this stuff in place. We're not doing anything that anyone else is not doing. We're just catching up." And for me, I had been there for so long at the time. Myself and Brad St. Louis was like the only guys left from that mid-'90s era. And I came in '96, and Marvin came in 2003. And I remember being out to dinner with the offense. I sat down on the river out there. We offense go to dinner, and Carson was the rookie that year. He wasn't starting that year, but he told John Kidman, he said, "Man, it's gonna be sure bad to lose got Willie in a year because he's probably old as hell, right?" And Kidman was now maybe 28 years old. I had been there for like 15, 17 years, like it was like it felt like I had been. It felt like I had been there for so long because I can say right now, there are guys I played with that, I think Bengal fans and people have forgotten about. They've forgotten about it. I played in the era with the Bengals, just not Travis. The Bengals film director gave me all my games on hard drive. So I'm putting together games and stuff like that. My teaching academy, but I get a chance to watch Johnny Scott and Carl Pickens. And I saw John Copeland at an event down in Mobile, Alabama. Dan Wilkerson, James Francis, all these different things. Because John Carl and Corey Dillon. People forget that Garrison Hurst played with us my rookie year. But from '96 to '02, that first year '96, I thought it was 8-8. I thought, oh man, the NFL is easy. We'll be winning 2 more years. We win 2 more games, and we'll be winning 10 games every year. Well, that didn't happen. We went from '96 to '88 to '79. My second year with Boomer, 3-13. Third year with Neil O'Donnell. Fourth year, I think when Jeff Blake started, we got to the Achilles. I forget about 4-12 maybe. 2005, 11. It was just crazy. 2002 was probably the worst season we had, and franchise history 2-14. But Marvin got there and immediately got that team to an 8-game season. Pretty cool, man. Now what's been done since then, I'm sure there's some things that Marvin would like to do better. Like we all have that should have done. But he did get it back to respectability. But like I say, I feel like I've been here. This is going to be his last year coaching with the Bengals, and I think he wants to go out with a bang. So I think once that team kind of sense that, I think we'll see a magical season from the Bengals.
Yeah, I think I definitely think Marvin wants to see the thing through that he's built over so many years with the Cincinnati Bengals. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We're talking with Bengals legend Willie Anderson. Willie, real quickly, just kind of a side note based on something you said there. about, a Bengals Ring of Honor or Hall of Fame, or, in my book, there are a handful of names, a small handful of names that jerseys should not be worn by other folks. And in my book, number 71 is definitely one of those jerseys that should not be worn by anybody else going forward by a Cincinnati Bengals player. Have there been any kind of serious talks about a Ring of Honor, or have you approached Mike Brown about it at all? I mean, I know you've got a pretty good relationship with the team, but that's something I know we all want to see.
Yeah, no, the last 10 years, I know the Bengals, either follow my Twitter account or they hear things I say in the media. Just I'm tired of it. I've been in Atlanta, and I've kind of publicly complained about it. And what I've heard is not going to happen. I don't think Mr. Brown believes in those kind of things. Doesn't believe in retiring jerseys. Doesn't believe in having a hall. I think the closest thing we got, which I think was a pretty cool thing, was the legend thing for the 50th anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
But I would love to see something that that you get these guys back, because once you get older, man. I've been retired now. This is my 10th season of being retired. And when you start getting older, most guys haven't played as long or had the career that I had and played for the Bengals. I think so many guys have been just forgotten about. And it's kind of, in my opinion, it's kind of sad, because you see these guys out, and these guys' kids don't even realize that their dad played for the Bengals.
Mm-hmm.
And because there's no mention of them. And that's kind of the sad thing about me. Like, people still remember me because I'm still active, but there's so many guys that played that I talked to, man, with guys from other companies of Cincinnati, but, they don't have any connection to it. My connection was for a long time, Marvin, I played there for a long time, and Paul and Xander, but now Paul is cold now, so my connection is kind of leaving a little bit too. But the last 2 years, I've been able to stay, around the guys, and I know a lot of the players. I train with Carl Martin, know Marvin, but now time is going on. Paul was there for 25 years, 24 years. Now he's gone now, so my commission is kind of leaving a little bit. So you want the commission to be to the team, not toward the coaches, because coaches are going to leave. But we all played and shed blood. Win or losses, we entertain and played as hard as we could for the Bengals organization. Yeah,
well, you are definitely one of the very, very best to ever suit up for the Bengals, and I hope that some point in the near future, I know a lot of fans will echo this sentiment, but I hope it's at some point in the near future they're gonna do the right thing on that front, retire jerseys, do the Ring of Honor, and honor players like yourself the right way. I hope that especially for not only the fans' sake, but for your sake and former greats, I hope they do that going forward. On a little bit of a lighter note, you had a coaching stint with your former offensive line coach, Paul Alexander, down in Dallas. You coached this summer, and what a group you got to coach down there. All pros and Pro Bowlers galore. Talk about that experience and maybe what's ahead for you in the coaching game.
Well, out of Atlanta, I run my academy, the Willie Anderson Line Academy, out of Atlanta. So you guys follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Instagram is O-Line Block. But I run an academy. I train high school, college, and pro guys. And in the last 3 summers, I've been in training camps. The Bengals 2 years ago, Cleveland last year, and obviously the Cowboys called me to come to training camp with those guys. But our thing is not in coaching. I respect all NFL coaches. I've even talked to Marvin about this, but I don't think Marvin wanted to do it. About being a consultant, because I feel like NFL rules have changed so much that coaches don't have enough time with their players anymore. I think the position that we all see that's struggling the most is offensive line, because during the season, there's so much putting in game plans. And so for young guys trying to develop, I don't feel like coaches they expensive. I've been in camp with guys, I've been talking to GMs, and I've talked to guys at Duke Tobin and guys around the NFL. Coaches don't have time to develop skills during training camp and during the season, because it's so much information and so much game planning. And so people say, do you want to coach? I'm like, no, I don't want to coach. I want to be a consultant. You see guys, some teams do it, like DeMarcus Ware is doing it for Denver Broncos. Robert Mathis is doing it for the Colts. Robert the pass rush specialist. And it's not really coaching, it's not game planning, but, I think sometimes, I think offensive line coaches may feel like I'm stepping on toes, which I don't want to do. So when people ask me to coach the Bengals, it's been talked about forever. Marvin and I, we talked about, certain players. He would text me over the years about certain players. I'm like, well, just bring me up. I work with the guys as a consultant, but, that comes with a whole other job that the NFL is not really understanding yet. Most teams don't understand what it is to be a consultant, a skilled consultant. Now, they bring back old coaches and to talk about stuff, but, after being a guy who still can move around and still can teach and show players whatever the offensive line coach want me to show them, I'm not teaching my own stuff. In Dallas, just what happened that Paul and I, we came up with those techniques from my rookie year to my fifth, sixth year in the league, so Paul knows that I know his techniques the best. Well, I also train guys from Philadelphia. I got guys from Cleveland, guys from the Redskins. I got guys all around the country, so I don't train just particular stuff, but I know I train whatever the coach want me to train on. I try to be my best at being diverse in multiple styles and training guards, center and tackle. So that's what we did it down. We did that for a week and a half, and it was a good time. The guys loved it, and I'm just hoping that they get a build on for maybe a consulting job in the near future in NFL.
Yeah, and how just so our listeners know, how can they? You mentioned kind of I think an Instagram account or Twitter account. How can people follow along, kind of what you're doing, how that business is growing? Maybe some of the guys you're working with.
Yeah, definitely. My Twitter account is Big Willie 7179. My Instagram account is O-Line Block, and my website is Willie Anderson Lineman Academy.net. So all my stuff is on there. A lot of pictures, videos. I have a series of videos that will come out on Vimeo that was a series of teaching, Pass Pro teaching videos. So that's kind of what I'm at. I'm all about teaching. I have a good following online right now. People following want to learn more about offensive line plays. So I think, if your favorite team is winning or losing, most likely it's because of the offensive line. So I think people should get more in tune about learning about offensive line. I mean, with the team to win, pretty much it's your O lineman and D lineman that's going to help either win or lose games.
Yep, absolutely. We'll get you out of here on this one quick little rapid fire question here, Willie. Toughest matchup you ever had in the pros, either edge defender or interior lineman you maybe had to help out with, or who was a guy that just was a really difficult matchup for you? Not that you ever showed very many vulnerabilities, but
I've had my battles. In my 13 years, I've given up 15 sacks. But my toughest was a guy, it's actually a psycho too. And if you go to my Twitter account, my Instagram, I have videos of me playing this guy. It's the late, great Reggie White.
Oh, yeah.
It was the only time in my career in 98, my 30 in the league, that I faced someone just as strong as I am. I was bigger than him, 340 pounds. He was about 300 pounds. But he was like 35, 36, way stronger than me. And I liken it as a kid wrestling with his dad in the backyard. So I shut him out, but man, he beat me up. I got him up one time. He humped me once, but I landed on my feet. He did it. I was able to block him out, but the entire game, man, he just put pressure on me as far as just pounding my body. He wasn't playing the full game. He was an older guy, but he was getting rest. I'm like, damn, he's going to the sideline getting rest. Well, I'm out here playing every down. Like folks don't realize that about offensive linemen.
Yeah.
We play every down.
Yep.
And we have a great Hall of Fame like Reggie White getting rest and coming on third down. Man, it's hell to pay. But I have those videos on my Instagram page and my Twitter account when we go and get Reggie. I'm far the best guy ever.
That's not. It's a surprising answer because I mean we just he retired a little bit after
Don't forget when I played like that. When I came in the era when 96 was all about Terry trying to call it a running game. Running game. Every NFL team had a running game. Pittsburgh with Jerome Bettis, Eddie Jones, the Titans. You had Fred Taylor and those guys down in Jackson. But every NFL team was about running the football. But I always say when we paid Carson that $100 million in 2005, my 10th year, I saw a change in dynamics in the NFL. It became about a quarterback league, so it became about protecting the quarterback. So a guy like Reggie White played in the 80s into the 90s, but you're seeing more dynamic pass rush guys now, I think, in more years than ever because there's more passing going on. You know what I mean? So don't forget about it. I played against Reggie White and against Dwight Friend and Robert Mathis. I played against Bruce Smith. I saw Javon Curtis. I saw James Harrison. You know what I mean? So playing a long time, I had a chance to see different rushers. I played against Strahan, all the different guys, Warren Sapp, all the guys. So I played in the heyday of pass rushers. I think I played in the heyday of when offensive tackles were a group of guys that we were all fighting for 2 all-pro slots. There's about 8 guys that you consider that are really neat. You know what I mean? So NFL is definitely involved in changes. You see more and more guys that are big-time pass rushers now. Yeah.
Well, I hope our listeners will go and check out some of those videos of you against Reggie White because that's an epic battle there. And appreciate all of your time. Again, this is Willie Anderson, Bengals legend, joining us on the program. We'll be sure to pass the word along about what you're doing with your coaching academy. And anytime you want to come back on the program, man, we'd love to have you.
Thank you, bro.
All right, appreciate it. That was Willie Anderson, former Bengals offensive lineman and multi-time Pro Bowler with the Cincinnati Bengals. And pretty stoked. I mean, in a matter of a month, we had basically the 2 best Bengals offensive linemen ever. I mean, Andrew Whitworth is in that discussion as well. But, man, that's pretty cool.